right, welcome back everyone to the Global Growth Marketing Virtual Summit brought to you by Mobile Monkey and Growth Marketing Conference. Super excited to have Melissa Matlins here with us, joining us all the way from New York. She's a VP of Marketing at Muse, and previously she was a founder, which she really enjoyed, and but what she enjoys the most is growing the company, growing the organization from 0 to 60, and she will tell us a little bit more about that, and how she developed in her current role. Muse, for those of you who didn't know, is a Series B startup, very fast-growing company based out of New York. But the topic that we will cover today is very important. As we focus on lead generation, user acquisition, it's really important to align your marketing and sales team. And how are you supposed to talk to your sales folks? So this is something that's been on Melissa's mind for a very long time, and she's here to share it with us today. If you have any questions, you can submit them by hitting the orange button on the bottom of the screen, or you can add them to the chat, and we will get back. We'll get to as many questions as we can. Without further ado, Melissa, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Great. Hi, thanks everybody. So I put together a few slides for today, so let me get that started here.
And
No.
to confirm, no worries.
Okay, that'll be a little bit better. So, hey everybody, just way of quick introduction. Melissa Matlins, I head up marketing here at the Muse. So what the Muse actually does is we're a destination site for the next gen workforce to research companies and careers. So we put our users first. We always also work with employers to help them find the talent that's actually going to help them transform their business. So you might think of us as a C to B2B type of company. So today I'll just be focusing on B2B, but I just encourage anybody that has a question about their career or just wanted some practical advice about what kind of dream companies you might work for and what their cultures are like, which is pretty much everybody, to just come and check out the Muse. So on to the good stuff. So what's kind of interesting to me is like if you work with the kind of sales leadership that wants you to kind of like build a business case for why you should work more closely together, you'll find a lot of stats to help you build that case. So I'm pretty sure most of you have already seen these, know these. So I just want to contextualize this with that's the only thing this slide is actually useful for, convincing others. I'm sure you're all smart marketers if you made it to this call today and you already know that marketing and sales alignment is going to be really, really key to your growth. So today I'd actually just rather share some thoughts and tips for how you can get marketing and sales cultures and programs aligned, and you can do what, frankly, I'm sure both marketing and sales teams actually want to do, which is grow a business. So this strife between marketing and sales teams is a really old story. So like cats and dogs, we've just been told all the time that these teams can't actually play all that well together and we're supposed to be at odds. So one of the things that I want to address is kind of like these deep myths and superstitions about what's actually going on with these teams, what people are actually working on, what metrics they're looking at, so people can just better understand what's behind this thinking and behind this sort of historic battle, for lack of a better word. So usually this starts with things that you hear around the office. So I like to call these kind of 4 infamous phrases, right? So you may hear from your sales counterparts, I'm sorry, who are we selling to exactly? Or, well, we don't really measure success that way. Or what do you actually mean by qualified? Tell me. My favorite is, I can't really talk about this right now. I can't even hear you. I'm just on the phone trying to close some business. So don't be afraid of these phrases. I think it is helpful though to unpack them a little bit, because what these grumblings actually uncover are some really kind of big common challenges that tend to sour marketing and sales relationships early when your relationship should actually be centered around where and how you're scaling the business. So the first really common indicator that something is off is having just a really unclear definition of what audience you're targeting and what they want. So that gets to questions that sound like, who are we selling to? What does that look like? Why this buyer? The second is, what are the qualification standards that you share for both leads and opportunities? These need to be really well understood, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. The last one is just, how are you actually measuring this? What is the visibility that both marketing and sales has into the effectiveness of the outreach that both teams are doing? And how can you just better coordinate that and bring that together and create a shared understanding? Last and most importantly, empathy. So this seems really simple, but marketing and sales have extremely different daily and monthly and quarterly rhythms. They don't naturally sync. Trying to bring them together can feel really counterintuitive. So it just takes some real effort on behalf of both teams to just come to a shared understanding and then have a consistent understanding of how that gets communicated over time so you can partner and scale. So I think all of these issues and these things, particularly these phrases, probably sound really familiar to a lot of people. I know we probably have mostly marketers on this call, so I'm always up for a late night break session about how sales just doesn't get it and they don't understand what we're working on and how we add value. And if there's one thing that you take away from this, that attitude is not going to help you scale. So I think what I would like to say is just forget all of that. Many of the companies that we work in are just too small, too fast moving for marketing and sales to be at odds. There's no space for this. There's no time for this. So then the question becomes, how do you actually get aligned? So I'm going to share 4 different best practices. So the first one is just building a buyer definition together. Really fundamental to where and how you start your journey towards marketing and sales alignment. To do this, you need to optimize for revenue, just like sales does. So don't optimize this definition to leads. So first, you just need to understand what that ideal part of the ideal customer profile is actually from every angle. So as an example, this means looking at ideal through the lens of sales data, not just your marketing data. So how you hone that definition goes far beyond what your leads actually look like and sound like and respond to. Look very closely at what's converting and also what's closing. Most importantly for SaaS businesses, what's actually renewing? What are you upselling? Find the patterns all the way through the funnel. And this is how you build a shared definition of what's actually best for the business, not just what's best for marketing. So you may also decide with sales teams that you don't actually want to let your historical buyer dictate your future one. So if you want to move into a new industry or a new vertical or try marketing to a new role, this is fine, but share that definition and that understanding. Don't go off on a night project to target a new industry vertical without talking to your partners in sales. And as you work this through with sales, always bring it back to the buyer. This shouldn't be about what marketing wants to do and how marketing wants to approach the market. Talk to them about the buyer, like a real person. Bring them into your meetings. If sales teams have call recording or transcription technology, it's a gold mine for actually understanding what's being said in the market and how your message is resonating, especially when the calls are early stage. Listen to them. And then, of course, just take opportunities to meet directly with customers, understand why they renew and why they buy. So you can build all of that back into your buyer definition at the front of funnel. And then I think lastly, sell this definition to sales. So if you're making a change to your target lead or account profile, show them what this actually looks like in their own individual pipelines. Show them what the forecasted close rates would be, and then how it would actually be better if the buyer definition was tweaked or changed. So this is what will ultimately change behavior and get and keep you aligned. So every salesperson and every individual contributor on that team is only looking at their funnel. So it's really, really hard for them to understand conversion rates across a company. And what they really want to see is where and how that applies to them. So just one more thing, pro tip, try to avoid the common behaviors for both marketing and sales teams. Engaging and talk about the buyer being dumb, they just don't get it, they're not following our process. Buyers buy backwards, so you have to understand that they're going to go through their own process that may or may not line up with your marketing and sales funnel. While it's always fun to gripe with colleagues, it's not actually marketing and sales alignment, so you're not actually building rapport, and in many cases, you're hurting the business. So sharing a definition of qualified. I want to just talk about that a little bit more, because this is all about building your understanding of who your buyer is and how they buy into your process and respecting that process. So most misaligned sales teams have this big gaping black hole where really effective marketing and sales handoff is supposed to be. I call this the trough of disillusionment, and to me, this is the #1 killer of growth. So what does actually a really effective marketing and sales handoff look like? Your lead and acquisition and engagement process has to be transparent to both the marketing and sales teams that are working it. So you need to show and share all of the detail that you have on buyers with sales. So buyers are having an experience with your company that includes marketing touch points and that includes sales touch points in many funnels all along this path. And if that experience is inconsistent, or if you're saying things that are at odds with each other, leads just opt out. That's just human nature. So what can be really challenging is if your quote unquote good leads definitionally aren't responding to sales outreach, it's really easy to point a finger at sales. Don't rule out that this might actually be you. Look at each other's emails, have sales go through messaging, understand where outreach is not aligned, take them through the process of evaluating this. What you're experiencing in the trough of disillusionment might actually be a disconnect that happened much earlier in the funnel when you, for example, acquired that lead. So second, every lead has attributes. So these may be behavioral signals. Did they sign up for a trial? Did they actually use the product, or did they invite somebody else to join? They may be demographic. Is this the right role? Is this the right industry? Are they in the right city? Again, expose how you examine or score or rate your leads across the funnel, and see if you can get alignment on this. You may be surprised at what certain signals sales considers really meaningful. They may not necessarily be demographic. So don't let your model sit on a shelf, and don't be assumptive about what's actually meaningful to sales. Look at the data and also have conversations and invite your partners in sales into that conversation. So lastly, just share what success looks like. So in addition to reporting out really frequently on conversion rates from stage to stage and where and how you're influencing leads and accounts and pipeline, tell stories. So talk about the journey of a lead or the journey of an account through the full funnel. It's just a really great way to give the data that you're sharing in terms of conversion rates and process and stages a lot more meaning, and build consensus and trust around what qualified actually ultimately looks like and why it matters. So my next point is about numbers, but it's really about culture. So metrics drive behavior, and also they just establish and dictate this mindset across sales and marketing. And it tells you what's working and also tells you what's not working, right? So where and how teams are working together to drive growth ultimately has to do with measuring metrics that matter. So best advice to marketers that are currently talking about leads and MQLs to their sales team, I can promise you that it is going like this. So if you want to get aligned with sales, pick a point in your funnel where both marketing and sales have a hand and a stake in actually qualifying a lead or qualifying an account and getting them to that point. It's a shared understanding. So this needs to be a metric where you can forecast revenue from, ideally, and approximate close rates. Better yet, you have a super predictable funnel and very predictable conversion rates eventually, and very strong alignment with sales. And at that point, you can actually start to share potentially revenue goals. So in doing this, you can just put to rest a lot of myths about what marketing is doing and what sales is doing. Right? So there is no best and there is no mine. In my current role, we look really closely at what leads and accounts were sourced by marketing that eventually make it to opportunity stage. and close stage and renewals and upsells. And we do this not to claim this as our leads. We have dozens of touch points with leads that we source and don't source. It doesn't make sense to say this is marketing and this is sales. We do this to figure out where we focus our time, our energy, and the dollars that we have to acquire and engage more leads that actually result in revenue growth and make sense for the business. So lastly, and I think this is the one where I might actually want to spend the most time, how do you tap into each other's cultures, right? So when I was talking about how I wanted to put together this presentation with my team, one of the analogies that I kept using was cats and dogs. Everybody thinks that they're enemies. In actuality, they can learn and they can adapt like most animals, and they figure out a way to get along when they have a shared understanding. So when I work with marketing and sales teams on alignment, the biggest thing to me is that I'm just really surprised by the lack of understanding of both objectives and the kind of the natural rhythms of each other's team. So typically when you first walk into a company, sales may not actually even understand that marketing is not gold on leads or empty wells, but gold on opportunities and revenue. Similarly, marketing may have a very poor understanding of what sales achievements and goals look like. Is that meetings? Is that revenue? Is that measured monthly, weekly, quarterly? So figuring this out and understanding what the goals are and how teams day to day are working backwards from those goals is really, really critical to tapping into each other's cultures and having a shared understanding of how you're going to grow. So just generally, marketing thinks in these really long time horizons. So we think from a campaign basis, we're building for the future, and we're working on campaigns for weeks and sometimes months. So from the moment of acquisition, a lead can take anywhere from a week to a year or years potentially to actually become sales ready. So this creates a really specific daily cadence that just doesn't look anything like sales activity. So goals for marketing tend to be monthly and quarterly. Sales on a very opposite track thinks in kind of daily and weekly activities. So monthly and quarterly goals are typical. This just creates an approach to growth in a sales culture that's entirely different from a marketing team approach. And what's so interesting about that is that you're all one company and you're all tied to the same growth goals and the same revenue goals. So it's very much a different mindset, and finding ways to, really tangible ways to tap into each other's cultures and understand that mindset and communicate effectively with different teams is really critical. So just, I think, like a couple of examples of what this might potentially look like. My first piece of advice is always to sell sales. So if you want to update them on your metrics, share campaign activity, tell them a story of an opportunity that you recently won and what that actually looked like from a marketing touchpoint perspective, approach that meeting with them like a sales meeting. That means communicating your value, being straightforward about what they're going to get out of it. And if you do have questions about what that's actually going to look like, my best advice on that is ask the salesperson or sit in on one of their meetings. Secondly, I think be very cognizant of what their cycles look like. So particularly how your sales targets are structured. So if your goals are monthly, it's not a great time on the 31st of the month to approach the sales team for a brainstorming session or an ask. So figuring out where and how you can plug into their calendar is really, really critical. They may be saying yes to that meeting because in many cases, sales teams are designed to say yes to meetings, but it's just going to be a lot more helpful to approach them at a different time and figure out what that partnership is going to look like when their ears are listening to that versus listening to deal close. So I think ultimately what this really means, and the point that I want to emphasize, is that cultural alignment is just a really core part of scaling a company. So you entirely control this as marketers. This is the piece that you can control. Where and how your market changes, or what your go-to-market looks like, or what your competitors are doing, are not necessarily in your control. What you do about it as a company, and particularly what your marketing and sales alignment looks like and how you work together as a team, is the piece that you can control. So many of you are just inside these small, fast-growing companies. You don't necessarily have time, honestly, for the typical marketing and sales drama. So if you've been frustrated in the past or currently by sales teams or certain behaviors, I just encourage you to put some of these methods and practices that we've talked about today and just see if you can work better together to eliminate some of the internal barriers that are holding you back from growth. So with all of that said, I'm happy to take questions. I apologize for not having more cute pictures of dogs and cats today, but I'm sure if anybody took a look through my decks, you'll see that there's a definite theme here, and I'm firmly team cat.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa. Really appreciate this presentation. And for everyone in the audience, if you have a question, you can either hit the orange button or add it to the chat. I want to expand a little bit on this question. I think it will be very relevant to our entire audience. Some of them are early stage startups, and I know that you have an experience being a founder yourself and working with founders and growing sales and marketing teams. What are the couple of maybe 3 things that comes to mind first if you're an early stage founder, and what do you need to know about sales and marketing first? And maybe we can expand into hiring later.
Yeah, I mean, for many companies, particularly for B2B, sales and marketing, super early stage, are effectively the same thing. And what I mean by that is if you are gold at vastly different points in your funnel, early stage, something is missing, right?
Yeah.
Super early stage, marketers need to be very closely tied and listening to what's going on in the market. You don't necessarily have the buying signals that you're going to get later, or your demographic or your target buyer all worked out. If you've only signed up 10 companies to your product, it's going to be really challenging to make assumptions about what your market's going to look like even 3 months from now based on a really small pool of data. So in some cases, the departure point just needs to be dramatically different. If your product growth rate is accelerating really fast, you also want to keep a really close look at that data, particularly conversion to upsells and renewals. It's very, very hard to understand, especially early, what's actually going to get you the long-term growth versus the short-term wins. So my advice would be take all of the advice that I just gave about staying really close to sales and amplify it. And particularly on the data piece, just run that analysis back even more frequently so you can make sure that you're not getting missed signals or the wrong signals.
Got it. So, but let's take one step back. Let's say we are a very small team, just several co-founders, and we feel like we sort of found the product market fit right now. So what would you recommend if we are ready to hire our first marketing / sales / growth person?
A really good sign for me when you're looking for that person for an early stage company is, do they ask you about what happens on sales calls, and do they want to join them?
Got it. If they
do they have curiosity and a desire to listen to the buyer?
Got it. So getting close to the customer. And overall, what during the interview, what other questions would you ask them? Let's say you haven't hired them just yet, but you're considering and interviewing.
I would say the number one thing I look for is curiosity generally. Typically that looks like in an interview, am I asking the questions? Are they asking the questions? So that tends to be the number one thing that I look like, whether it's a marketing hire or a sales hire. But I think in addition to that, are they asking questions that give you the confidence that they're going to help you instrument what this is going to look like in the future? And so what that typically sounds like is they're like heat seekers for directional signals, right? So really early stage, it's very unlikely that you're going to say, all right, I know in 12 months that 33% of our buying audience is going to come from the financial services industry and 53% is going to come from healthcare. You're just not going to have the data that supports that kind of predictability in your targeting. So making sure that they're staying very closely aligned with sales to listen, not just looking at renewals, because who knows, maybe you're not even at that stage yet, especially if you're doing annual, right? But they're even seeing what are the earliest buying signals that people are throwing off that show you that you're pointed in the right direction. Sometimes you won't necessarily have the sales data or enough of it to really understand that. So it's important that you can see very clearly that they're starting to figure out how they're going to instrument it and what they're going to look for.
Got it. Yeah. So now let's move one step further. Let's say you sort of reach certain level of scale. When do you feel it's the right time to hire first VP of sales?
Mm-hmm. I feel like that's always a really interesting question, because I think so many founders are in the business because they care really deeply about the buyer and they feel really passionate about sales, right? And so like letting go of that direct contact and frankly the high of winning can be really, really challenging. I think usually that point comes when you feel like you've got some sort of predictability in your approach, right? And that's not just from a product perspective, but you've got true resonance with the buyer. You have some renewals under your belt. You have some referral dynamics that are happening. And you feel, I think, more comfortable handing that off when it becomes a one-to-many relationship versus a one-to-one relationship in sales. So I feel like there's also too a side debate that's related to this about whether you hire a head of marketing first or a head of sales first.
Yeah.
I think the answer for many young companies can also be, like hire somebody who can potentially do both for a little bit, just to again emphasize that linkage that you need to create a whole funnel experience versus discordant experiences in two places.
And I think it's also depends on what kind of product do you have, right? Also, so that's, we, for example, we hired our first executive hire was VP of Sales and Customer Success, because we realized that retention was a really big and important element for our growth strategy. Great.
I mean, I've talked myself out of jobs as well by saying, actually, what I think you really need is a head of sales, right?
Yeah.
I think in many cases, without knowing enough about the market that you're stepping into, it can be hard to really put your foot on the gas of marketing. Like, marketing is not going to paper over whether or not you have real resonance with buyers.
Excellent. So we have time for a few quick questions here. So I'm curious in this one too. Who do you think should lead well, you kind of answered it in the very beginning, but I would love you to expand it a little bit. In terms of the lead generation, who is in charge of it? Is it marketing or sales?
Who's in charge of lead generation?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I would probably struggle to say that sales is in charge of that. I might go like a step further also potentially and say like marketing is in charge of funnel strategy.
Okay.
Right.
Interesting.
And I guess I say that too because the exercise around defining the buyer is always something that I've previously led. Not that I wouldn't welcome really extensive sales partnership on that, but frankly, I think for the most part, many sales teams aren't designed to be reflective. They're designed to move in one direction, and that is to a close. So it's very hard for them to go back and say what were the dynamics that contributed to that process. And that's something that just marketers, I think, from a mindset perspective, are just a little bit better capable of seeing and understanding and instrumenting.
Cool. Great. So one last question. Actually, I'm curious to get your take on this question overall. If marketing has found only a small target audience, how can sales convince them to expand the scope?
I think in many cases, that's a very real thing, especially for a smaller audience. To me, I think that's actually just zooming out a little bit of a deeper question that really fundamentally needs to be answered by product, marketing, and sales, right? In many cases, if you've found a really niche audience or an audience that's not necessarily converting at the rate that you want, or it's just not big enough to get what you need out of it, it's a signal typically that something is going on in product where you just need to widen the scope a little bit or make it more applicable to a greater number of buyers.
Awesome. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I wish we would do another full-on session with you, Melissa, but thank you so much for joining us today.
And yeah, thank you very much.
Absolutely. We'll see everyone in our next session with Isaac Rudansky, and he will be talking about chatbot marketing in the next session. See you guys there. Thanks.
Thank you.